Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, so for this part of the course, we're joined by Julia Cook to talk credit consumption and the depoliticisation of debt. As before, you can see Julia's work here. Check out some of the stuff she's done in more public-facing work, particularly after being 2022 ABC Top 5 Humanities Scholar. Um, and We're now talking about the one of the papers we set for a reading this week, which Julia led. So, Julia, tell us a little bit about this work.
Yeah, sure. In this work, we were particularly focusing on buy now, pay later services. So you can see some images of them here. Maybe there's something that you've used, but if that's not something you've come across, buy now, pay later is a service where you can buy an item and then make repayments on a schedule over time. The classic afterpay is pay it back in four installments at 2 week intervals. There's lots of different temporalities of repayment, but basically at this point in time, we found that young women were the majority users of buy now, pay later. They were the target audience. This has actually shifted a bit in more recent years. We have some pretty good evidence that it's more kind of gender equal in terms of buy now, pay later use now. So this is really capturing a particular point in time. But in
Hmm.
terms of, I guess, what I'm talking about in this paper, you can maybe start to get a sense of some of the kind of like girly, feminine aesthetics here. If you look at these images, would you think that they're advertising a consumer credit product?
Yeah, yeah, that's
Would you
right.
think
They're
that this is finance?
very much lifestyle kind of shop, kind of brand kind of things. Yeah, and the interesting with the gender thing, yeah, I think when we first started doing this, the vast majority of users were women, and now it's kind of, I think in our own survey data, about 60% of young people were using them. It was a pretty even gender spread. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really changed. So in terms of the specific kind of smaller study that this paper drew from, we were interested in the research question, how are buy now, pay later products represented in digital and physical spaces? And how does this shape their effective appeal, particularly to young women who were their primary market at this time? So trying to answer that question. And in terms of the data that we used, we did a walking ethnography through a shopping centre. So we went into, it was actually the shopping centre and homemaker centre in Katara here in Newcastle, and we went into every shop and looked at, where do they have buy now, pay later, like signs, flyers, anything to do with buy now, pay later, and we recorded that, took some photos to see, how is this designed in physical space? How is it kind of suggesting itself as an option to pay? We also did a digital ethnography where we looked at websites and particularly looked at the digital interface of some of these apps. So at one point in time, I had a lot of them downloaded onto my mobile phone, not anymore, but at one point I had like 12 of them.
Yeah. I
And
wonder what that
then,
did to your credit rating.
yeah, I did wonder that.
Yeah.
Yes, probably nothing good.
Yeah.
And then we did some interviews with young women who used buy now, pay later services just to get a sense of, some of the things that we were trying to claim about them just to actually play out in practice for the people that we're trying to make claims about. So the interviews helped us to kind of sense check
Hmm.
what we were interpreting from the other aspects of the study. So that's what we did, and now I can show you some of what we found.
Yeah.
So we found that in kind of digital spaces, the buy now pay later product, so on their apps, websites, they were very reminiscent of the aesthetics and the kind of functionalities of social media platforms. So similar to some of what we were saying in the last segment of the lecture, similar thing going on here. So there were functionalities that were similar to creating like a Pinterest page where you could like pin and flag things that you were personally interested in. There were some interfaces that looked really similar to something like Instagram. So clearly you would go into these digital spaces, go into the apps, and it didn't feel like using a banking app or using any other form of credit. It felt like using a social media app or, even doing some online shopping in some ways.
Yeah.
So it immediately had a kind of a feeling that was really, really different to other, forms of consumer credit.
Yeah. And definitely they're very different feeling from walking into a bank. Yeah.
Oh, 100%. Yes, definitely. And so we argued, kind of drawing on some of this, that buy now, pay later services draw on discourses, images, affects that have been really central to the creation of what we can call digitally intimate spaces on social media sites such as Pinterest, Instagram, Tumblr. So digitally intimate spaces are very much what they sound like. They're spaces where, despite huge geographic space, people can have a sense of intimacy and familiarity with people that are otherwise strangers, and they can bond around consuming and enjoying the same things. And so, even though our buy now pay later kind of apps were not connected to each other, and it was a space that we were occupying individually, they still were reminiscent of these spaces of, connection and comfort on social media that make us feel, really comfortable and like we're among people that are quite similar to this. And we argued that in doing this, they were creating a kind of what we can call a structure of feeling that was reminiscent of these social media spaces. So, they felt very similar. The kind of structure of feeling refers to a kind of shared sentiment that is at the stage before it becomes a social norm. So something that can be a bit hard to pin down, but it can be, in this case, the shared feeling of kind of sameness and comfort that we might get from a social media space that we feel really comfortable in.
Yeah.
So the the buy now pay later spaces, we argued, tried to kind of mimic that and give that similar feeling of comfort. And particularly, they had this sense of like relatable fun in terms of, you know, the sense that you might get when you're purchasing consumer goods that are marketed to women, when you're buying like clothing, accessories, beauty products, gifts, even.
Yeah.
They tried to make that feel, fun and
Yeah.
like something that many people were doing, and that played out amongst our participants. We had Alana who identified Afterpay as my fun thing, or Megan that identified using buy now pay later as just something really normal, like
Mm.
just a normal thing that everyone does, and part of a certain form of normalized femininity.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, that's right. And importantly, again, relating to other course material here, that many of the apps do a kind of personalized version of this. So they kind of create this kind of sharing of feelings, but it's like very much tailored to you based on your previous data and previous behaviors, and algorithms feeding you products, and even probably things like colors and aesthetics that kind of it's judging that will suit the way that you feel about these things.
Very much, and it's trying to create a kind of structure of feeling that is tailored to you, that makes you feel really good and really comfortable and surrounded by things that you like.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so if we're thinking about, I guess, some of the things that we noticed about the buy now pay later spaces, particularly online, we noticed that there was two kind of different forms of images that came up a lot. One was these really kind of relatable images, and then another was aspirational images. And we tried to understand like what's going on here, why these two different kind of genres of images. So starting with the relatable images, these are some examples, but there were lots of advertisements or images on these sites where people were kind of like chilling in their own like spaces, chilling at home, doing some online shopping, listening to music, your dog's kind of there chilling with you. That's something that a lot of people can relate to. It's not particularly glamorous, it's just a kind of everyday moment, similar to, being at home, sitting out on a deck chair, scrolling in your phone, maybe taking some selfies, your cat's there, you've got your coffee, you're
Yep.
in your happy place, but it's not a space for public consumption for the most part. It's a private space. And it's really interesting that these private images are like all over the marketing of buy now, pay later. And we would argue that this is creating a sense of what we could call kind of intimate relatability. So this sense of, oh, I do that too. Like I'm kind of similar to what's going on in this space. Like I can see kind of similarities between myself and these people in this kind of unglamorous way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so if we think about like what on earth does this have to do with the kind of aspirational, glamorous images? Because we can remember that Afterpay is one of the lead sponsors of the Australian Fashion Week.
Yep.
So, there is a kind of a glamorous aspect to it as well. So if we're thinking about the kind of aspirational images that are coming from things like Fashion Week versus these like, chilling home with your dog kind of images, bringing that together, we can, what we kind of argued here is that this kind of relatability, the sense of like we're all the same, is kind of means of critiquing certain kind of feminine standards of success, such as those that are represented in the aspirational images and discourses on buy now, pay later apps and websites, things from Fashion Week, for instance,
Mm.
while at the same time remaining kind of attached to them and measuring oneself in relation to them. So it's this idea of, you are kind of not quite measuring up to being a supermodel on the runway, but that's still the yardstick for success. And we can all bond a little bit over the fact that we don't quite measure up. And that becomes a space where we can, where women can kind of relate to each other in a way.
Yep.
And this is very much what's kind of going on in the way that these apps are presented and marketed. So they're glamorous and aspirational in some ways, but they're also very relatable. And those two things are very, very connected. And I'm drawing here from really wonderful work by Akane Kanai, who has written a lot about relatability, aspiration, and feminine sameness.
Yeah. Okay. So they have that kind of aesthetic thing going on. But you also kind of looked at them as ways to pay both digitally and in person. So can you tell us a little bit about
Yes,
that? Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, yep. So we found in in terms of the kind of digital spaces and in terms of the in-person spaces, they were very much always marketed as like not a line of credit, not a credit product,
Mm.
simply a way to pay for things, like a vehicle to get to your consumer products that you wanted, an
Yep.
unobtrusive part of that. And that very much played out in the way that our interview participants saw them. So I'm not
Mm.
going to go through these quotes in detail here, but you can see that Anna and Haley are saying they're basically, a way to pay. They're something that you can use quite easily. They're not as serious as a bank. They feel more like a payment platform,
Mm.
something like PayPal, for instance, rather than a credit card.
Yeah, it's interesting that, isn't it? Like, because a lot of people compare it to lay-by, the old school where you would
Yes.
purchase something, the shop would keep it, and after, you make four payments over a month or however long, you would then get the item. That's not how this works, is it? Like you pay for it, you get the item, and basically then you pay back the creditor. But also what happens here is the creditor takes a little cut from the seller as well. So basically by having this as a way to pay for any shop online or in person, um, the Afterpay or Klarna or whatever gets a little percentage as well. So they kind of take from both the seller and the buyer, don't they?
Yeah, very much. So it's a similar model to something like Uber Eats. Like they're not just taking a cut from the customer, they're taking a
Mm.
cut from the restaurant too.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
you would also imagine as a customer that some of this would be built into the prices that you're being charged. So there's
Mm.
maybe an inbuilt surcharge going on
Mm.
here. So,
Yeah.
if you're trying to think about how am I paying for this, multiple ways. So this is just another, I suppose, representation of this kind of way to pay and how it's integrated into physical space. So this is a quick photo that I took in a shop, and it's saying pay the way you like. There's Afterpay, ZipPay, Hum, like the first three are buy now, pay laters. Then we have Alipay and WeChat Pay, and then we have a suite of different credit cards. So it's just that I think the thing that I would emphasize here is it's saying pay the way you like, and they're all basically, well, the vast majority are credit products of some
Mm.
type. And if we look at the way that this is presented, buy now, pay later services scrupulously avoid the words credit and debt. They do not want to be associated with those words. They instead try to emphasize, it's easy, it's flexible, it's hassle-free, it's no stress, it's just easy, straightforward, don't have to think about it too much. And they have taglines such as "Don't pay later, pay better."
Yeah.
So they're trying to emphasize this isn't just a way to pay, it is a better way to pay.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. And so you might be wondering how these things relate to each other. Like, why am I talking about aspiration and relatability and then talking about, like, oh, it's just a way to pay? Like, how are these things connected? And so the connection between these things, just to kind of, I suppose, recap what we've covered. So we have the buy now, pay later services, their digital interfaces, online spaces, branding practices. They're generating a specific structure of feeling that's reminiscent of these digitally intimate online spaces, social media sites where we feel really comfortable. And in addition to kind of explaining some of the appeal of these services for young women, this kind of structure of feeling also creates a sense of intimacy and pleasure and fun. So we can understand in a way why buy now, pay later services are so popular. Like they can be really fun to use, they can be really easy to use, they feel comfortable. I
Hmm.
think if we focus on how they make people feel and the kind of affective, emotional appeals they make to people, we can understand them more. And I think this is really important because this is what enables the buy now, pay later services to basically position themselves as a way to pay rather than a form of credit. So if they're positioning themselves as like, I'm just a fun thing, I'm just a girly thing, I'm just a way to pay, all of this sets the stage for them not being taken seriously as consumer credit. They're just a way to pay, and it
Yep.
helps them kind of slip under your radar in a lot of ways. So these things are very connected.
Yeah. So why does this matter in sense? And then, like, can you relate this to kind of the notion of a depoliticization of debt?
Very much, yes. So I think by presenting binoculars in this way as, something that's kind of like girly and related to these like intimate feminine practices, the effort is to kind of make them appear as though they are not credit, they're
Mm.
not debt, they're not anything that you should take terribly seriously, which has a certain gender politics to it as well, obviously, because we're
Yeah.
thinking of, things that are feminine as things that are not serious, which I would argue is not at all true and not at all fair.
Yeah.
And so it's trying to kind of remove debt and credit, or the debt and credit they offer, completely from their political context and from any kind of context where you could critique them for what they are or relate to them with the seriousness that credit consumption and
Mm.
debt probably warrants. And we can see this as well by presenting themselves in this way. Buy now, pay later services were able to skirt credit regulations for a really long time. They've only been regulated as credit for less than a year.
Yeah.
They've been around since 2014.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And to conclude, you've just told us what's important. Where do you think this is going next? Like in terms of what these products are going to do, what new products are coming?
So I think it's a really interesting space because Australia is one of the kind of front runners in terms of regulating, but we're seeing similar efforts all around the world. So similar things are happening in the UK. The Financial Conduct Authority are also regulating buy now, pay later as credit. So I'm interested to see, does that change how consumers relate to these products? We can also see at the same time that, these services have made such an effort to distinguish themselves from banks and other legacy financial institutions that banks have increasingly, opened up
Mm.
their own buy now, pay later options. And we see the integration of buy now, pay later in other platforms as well. So PayPal has one that's very popular now. So it's spreading across other platforms and being embedded in more and more kind of everything apps. So
Yes.
it's an interesting space where things are moving really quickly. And I think it will be fascinating to see how do people relate to buy now, pay later in this new landscape? And
Yeah.
what does it mean, for instance, now that we can see that there's a more even gender distribution in terms of who's using it? What does it mean to these young men? We know now to some degree what it means to young female consumers. How are young men relating to it? Is it similar? Is it different? There's lots and lots of questions to be answered in this space.
Excellent. Thanks so much for your time, Julia. We'll stop it there.
Great, thanks for having me.